Hello, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International.
And I'm CJ Hero. Welcome to our program. Now on tonight's headlines.
Malacanang disagreed with Vice President Leni Robredo's remark that President Duterte's threat that things would not be easy if she seeks the presidency in 2022 is unprecedented.
Australia's elite special forces unlawfully killed 39 Afghan civilians and prisoners, including summary executions, as part of initiation rituals, according to evidence in a searing military inquiry now being referred to a special war crimes prosecutor.
Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha ordered security agencies to crack down on pro-democracy protesters days after police used tear gas and water cannon at a Bangkok rally.
Lobsteropolis, an exhibition by British pop artist Philip Colbert, can be visited in person or remotely from a computer or a phone via a telepresence robot able to wander around and interact with other visitors.
Malacanang disagreed with Vice President Leni Robredo's remark that President Duterte's threat that things would not be easy if she seeks the presidency in 2022 is unprecedented. In a palace press briefing, presidential spokesperson Harry Roque said the president was simply being consistent with his tough-talking language. President Duterte lashed out at Vice President Robredo for allegedly grandstanding during typhoon relief efforts by making it look like she was in charge and pretending not to know his whereabouts. In response, the Vice President tagged Duterte as unprecedented. Take a look.
Alam niyo, hindi naman po plastic si Presidente at hindi naman niya ngayon lang ginawa yan. Consistent po ang behavior ng Presidente. Is that unpresidential? I don't think so, because 91% of the people have said that they trust and they believe that the President is performing well in his duties. Is it unpresidential? According to 91% of our people, no. According to 5%, including the Vice President, yes. I have to read kung anong sinabi ng spokesperson ni VP Leni. Kaya naman pala talaga naghimutok si Presidente. Ang sabi po ni Barry Gutierrez, no? Leaders should be seen and felt in times of crisis, in an apparent comment on the government's response to Typhoon Ulysses. Kaya nga po, sabi ng Presidente, sinungaling ka kasi sinabi mo wala ako, nandun ako sa ASEAN. Ginawa pala ito ni Attorney Barry Gutierrez, sinabi niya ito doon sa lingguhang radio show ng Vice President. No? Sabi nga ka Eli, kung talagang gusto may paraan, pero kung ay ayaw gawin, maraming dahilan. Kung tatanungin mo yung security, sasabihin niya, kung maaari, wag na. Nandun na mismong principal kung tutuloy siya o hindi. So ito yung sinasabi niya na talagang hindi lumalabas daw itong ating Presidente. No? Ito pa yung sabi ni Barry Gutierrez, alahanin natin na hindi lang naman physical na tulong ang kailangan. Importante sa tingin ko ay pakiramdam na hindi ka nalilimutan ng iyong mismong pamalaan. Meron kang gobyerno na patuloy na nagbabantay at suportahan. So kung totoo, Vice President, na hindi mo sinabi nasa ng Pangulo, yung spokesperson mo dito. Scold your spokesperson, do not demand an apology from the President. Yun po yung trabaho namin mga spokes. Well, ito po kasi yung sinasabi ko, may advice to VP Leni. Tigil muna ang politika sa panahon ng pandemya, sa panahon ng mga sunod-sunod na aberya gaya ng mga bagyo. Si Presidente po, yan ang paninindigan. Kung hindi naman lumabas yung mga issue na ganyan, na nasaan si Presidente, wala namang po sinasabing masama ang Presidente kay VP Leni. Meron ba ho? Wala. In fact, nung isang opisyales nagpapalakas kay Presidente, gustong imbestigahan si VP Leni nung namimigay siya ng assistance sa COVID, ang ginawa ni Presidente, sinibak yung opisyal na yon. Dahil ayaw niyang kahit sino ay hadlangan yung pagbibigay ng tulong ng kahit sino, including Vice President. So the President's track record in attempting to have a harmonious working relationship with the Vice President is there. Pero ang ginaganti po ni Vice President, walang tigil na pula. What can we do?
Malacanang said President Duterte has approved the recommendation to make advance payments to suppliers of potential vaccines for COVID-19. The president agreed to enter into advance market commitments to avoid being among the last countries to acquire a vaccine. The president was initially against having to pay pharmaceutical companies to reserve vaccines in advance. Here's Vaccine Czar, Secretary Carlito Galvez. Watch this.
Magkaroon po tayong tinatawag na advance market commitment ay kagad po ilalatag po nila yung kanilang manufacturing supply. Sa ngayon po sa kinakausap po namin, ang pinaka-earliest po is possibly kung sa Russia po kung tama po yung sinabi po ng ating ambassador, first quarter pwede pong magkaroon tayo ng ating bakuna. Pero ang inano po namin talaga sa mga kinakausap po namin ay ang pinaka-earliest best case scenario is May, June, sa COVAX with July, and even ang natin malaki po ang ating magiging supply pagka nagkaroon po sa third quarter at saka fourth quarter. Even po sa 2022 ay malaki po ang supply po natin. Meron po tayong more than 17 million na assured from COVAX.
Presidential spokesman Harry Roque said President Duterte also approved various modes of financing for vaccines, including private-public tripartite agreements without cost to government and the emergency use authorization to be issued to the Food and Drug Administration via proposed executive order. Once the president issues an executive order, Roque said it would speed up the process of allowing the use of vaccines with FDA approval from countries they were developed in. In a taped meeting with cabinet members aired Tuesday, Duterte said the government must get the best bargain for the country's supply of vaccines once available. Duterte said he will rely on vaccine czar Carlito Galvez Jr. to manage the acquisition of a vaccine by December or January next year. Galvez, in the same meeting, said the government can enter into a multilateral arrangement with the World Bank and Asian Development Bank to facilitate the country's vaccine procurement.
Meanwhile, U.S. coronavirus deaths passed 250,000 people Wednesday as New York announced it would close schools to battle a rise in infections. And anti-restriction protests in Europe turned violent. America has now registered 250,426 fatalities according to a running tally by Johns Hopkins University, by far the highest reported national death toll. U.S. states and cities were imposing a raft of new restrictions, including home confinement, the closure of indoor dining, and a limit on gathering as cases soar across the country, with more than 157,950 new infections recorded over the past 24 hours on Wednesday. Meanwhile, New York Mayor Bill de Blasio said the city's 1,800 public schools would revert to remote learning beginning Thursday after the Big Apple recorded a 7-day average positivity rate of 3%.
Exactly on the number of 3.00%. But unfortunately, as of today, on our 7-day rolling average for coronavirus positivity, New York City has hit exactly 3.0%. And as a result, we do need to close our schools for the coming days. No one is happy about this decision. We all, in fact, are feeling very sad about this decision because so much good work has been put into keeping the schools opening them up to begin with. Let's start there. Opening the schools when almost no other major school system in America opened, making them so safe. And I want to emphasize to parents, to educators, to staff, to kids, that we intend to come back and come back as quickly as possible.
Mary Turner, an ICU nurse and president of Minnesota Nurses Association, grows emotional as she addresses U.S. President-elect Joe Biden during a virtual meeting about the COVID-19 pandemic. With her voice breaking, she said she has held the hand of dying patients who are crying out for their family that they cannot see. Watch this.
We're seeing community spread broadly now throughout the state of California.
As coronavirus cases surge in the U.S., nurses and other healthcare workers say hospitals are understaffed and lack resources to handle the rise
I
in
myself have held the hand of dying patients who are crying out for their family that they can't see. I've taken care of co-workers as they fight for their lives on a ventilator, and knowing that they got sick because of the hospital or their government hasn't protected them.
As coronavirus cases surge in the U.S., nurses and other healthcare workers say hospitals are understaffed and lack resources to handle the rise in hospitalizations. 800 nurses went on strike this week in Pennsylvania to pressure hospitals into increasing staff. In a nationwide survey of 15,000 nurses, 42% of them said staffing has gotten slightly or much worse recently.
You're seeing.
And citing what he called an unprecedented spike in COVID-19 cases, Governor Gavin Newsom said the state is hitting an emergency brake on economic activity, moving 28 counties, including Orange, back to the most restrictive tier of California's matrix governing business operations. Take a look.
October. We are now moving backwards, not forwards. And last week was an indication, an early indication of some movement in the, well, more restrictive direction. Let me specifically tell you what I mean today. 40 counties now will be moving backwards in the state. You'll see, and I'll show you, every age group, every demographic, racial, ethnic, in every part of the state. We are seeing case rates increase and positivity rates increase as well. No longer concentrated in just a handful of counties. We are seeing community spread broadly now throughout the state of California.
San Francisco stopped indoor dining and reduced capacity at fitness centers and movie theaters from Saturday, following a 250% spike in cases since early October. Now, 12 of California's 58 counties are currently subject to the state's tightest level of restrictions, which includes closed schools and bars and outdoor dining only at restaurants.
Stores are closed on New York's iconic Fifth Avenue as the coronavirus pandemic keeps tourists at bay. Souvenir shop manager Mukhtar Ahmed only stays afloat thanks to the generosity of his landlord, as he has not been able to pay the rent since March. Tourist numbers have dropped 66% in 2020, according to NYC & Company. Its Vice President Christopher Haywood reckons that the crisis has been decimating all facets of the industry. Watch this.
Since we locked down here and tried to open back business in June, but there's no tourists. And this is city, Manhattan is we survive with the tourists. And tourists is completely shut down, and some is banned to come in the United States.
So it's been a very challenging time for the city's travel and tourism industry, as it has for all destinations across the globe. We're looking at about a 66% drop in tourism overall, and that's after coming off 10 years of consecutive growth in the city. Well, tourism is an industry that employs about 403,000 people, and it represents about $72 billion in total economic impact. So for every dollar generated, there's another 50 cents that's generated in indirect spending. So it's a very lucrative industry and affects every facet of the tourism economy, from hotels and restaurants to retailers and tours, you name it. This pandemic, it has been decimating all facets of our industry. And I will tell you, it's been all of the iconic institutions, the hotel sector, but most importantly, the small businesses. The small businesses have been really affected by this. It's been very, very difficult. And those businesses that strictly rely on tourists.
And on a sad note, the independent state of Samoa has reported its first case of COVID-19 despite current travel restrictions and months of success in preventing the virus from entering the South Pacific nation. Alfred Asenas from our Hawaii Bureau has this report.
Mr. Tulia Epa Sailele Malelegoy, the Prime Minister of the independent state of Samoa, offered some words of calm to his fellow countrymen of more than 200,000 after confirming that a man flew into their country last Friday and tested positive for COVID-19 while in a supervised, isolated environment. During a televised address on Thursday, the Prime Minister stated, and I quote, "We now have one case and will be added to the countries of the world that have the coronavirus." The said patient was a sailor who arrived in Samoa on a repatriation flight from Auckland, New Zealand. Until recently, the remote Pacific Island states were among the most successful in the world at keeping out the virus after closing their borders early in response to the threat, despite the huge cost to tourism-reliant economies. But in the past couple months, countries like Vanuatu, the Solomon Islands, the Marshall Islands, and now independent Samoa have lost their coveted virus-free status, although none have so far reported any community transmission. To recall, around this time last year, Samoa had to deal with a measles epidemic that claimed 83 lives, most of them babies and toddlers. Samoa is also trying to avoid repeating history as it lost more than 10,000 people during the influenza pandemic more than a century ago. Now, even as we speak, the island nations and territories of Kiribati, Micronesia, Nauru, Palau, Tonga, Tuvalu, as well as American Samoa remain free of COVID-19. Reporting from Honolulu, Hawaii, I'm Alfred Asenas, Eagle News. We live in interesting times. Back to you.
Thank you, Alfred. We'll take a short break. Eagle News, we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
This portion is brought to you by Canreef Corporation, your ventilation and air conditioning specialist. Services offered, supply and installation of elevator.
Back to the news. South Australia entered a 6-day circuit breaker lockdown for its nearly 2 million people Wednesday to contain a sudden coronavirus outbreak that ended months-long streaks of no infections. Schools, shops, pubs, factories, and even takeaway restaurants were told to close at midnight, and stay-at-home orders were issued for residents across the state. A total of 22 cases have now been linked to a cluster that emerged from an Adelaide hotel used to quarantine travelers from overseas. The state is the first in Australia to issue a blanket ban on outdoor exercise, and mask wearing will be required across the state, which has not recorded a significant outbreak since April. Chief Health Officer Nicholas Purrier said the infections appeared to be caused by a particularly virulent strain that was spreading very, very rapidly, with people becoming contagious within just 24 hours.
Meanwhile, Japan is on maximum alert after logging a record number of daily coronavirus infections. Its prime minister said Thursday, though no immediate restrictions are planned. The comments came as Tokyo raised its alert level to the top of its fourth-year system, with local media saying the capital would report a record number of infections for a second day running. More than 2,000 cases were recorded nationwide on Wednesday, with nearly 500 in Tokyo. While these figures are comparatively low, globally speaking, they represent a sharp rise in cases for Japan, where testing is open or often less widespread than in other parts of the world.
Now here in the Philippines, the 286 new recovered cases reported on Thursday pushed the total number of coronavirus disease or COVID-19 recoveries to 374,939. In its 4 p.m. case bulletin, the Department of Health also reported 1,337 newly confirmed infections, bringing the nationwide tally of active cases to 30,493. About 84.5% of the active cases are mild, 8% are asymptomatic, 2.5% are severe, and 0.21% are moderate, while 4.7% are in critical condition. Davao City topped the list of areas with new confirmed cases with 110 infections. It is followed by Laguna with 74, Quezon City with 66, Batangas with 54, and the city of Manila with 53 infections. The DOH also logged 41 new deaths, which brought the death toll to 7,998.
Australia's elite special forces unlawfully killed 39 Afghan civilians and prisoners, including summary executions, as part of initiation rituals, according to evidence in a searing military inquiry now being referred to as Special War Crimes Prosecutor. A years-long internal investigation into military misconduct was released on Thursday, prompting the chief of the Australian Defence Force to admit a destructive culture of impunity among special forces, leading to a string of alleged murders and cover-ups spanning years. Take a look.
What also emerged was a toxic competitiveness between the Special Air Service Regiment and the 2nd Commando Regiment, destructive of trust, cohesion and mission, and a disgrace to both. As units became consumed with preparing for and fighting the war, much of the good order and discipline of military life fell away. Cutting corners, ignoring and bending rules was normalised. The report notes that distorted culture was embraced and amplified by some experienced, charismatic and influential non-commissioned officers and their protégés, who sought to fuse military excellence with ego, elitism and entitlement. The report finds that some Special Air Service Regiment commanders in Australia fostered within the SAS what Justice Burton terms a self-centred warrior culture. A misplaced focus on prestige, status and power, turning away from the regiment's heritage of military excellence fused with the quiet humility of service.
The report also reported evidence that troops were engaged in body count competitions and covered up unlawful killings by staging skirmishes, planting weapons, and adding names to target lists retrospectively. The military's own Inspector General produced the harrowing 465-page official inquiry into events between 2005 and 2016 that detailed dozens of killings outside the heat of battle. It recommended 19 individuals be referred to Australian Federal Police, compensation be paid to the families of victims, and the military makes a slew of reforms.
3 former pro-democracy Hong Kong lawmakers appear in court after being arrested for hurling foul-smelling liquid inside the legislature earlier this year in an attempt to halt a debate on a law criminalizing insults against China's national anthem. The case comes as police start to bring prosecutions against lawmakers or opposition lawmakers after Beijing disqualified 4 from the camp, triggering an en masse resignation of their remaining colleagues. Watch this.
It is an honor for me as a political representative of Hong Kong people to face prosecution from the dictatorship caused by our actions to stop the passage of the national anthem ordinance. It is our duty to fight for Hong Kong people, and we did just that.
On the anniversary of China's 1989 deadly crackdown on Tiananmen protesters, and Chan said the jar of brown liquid represented the stink of that tragedy. But it also forced lawmakers to leave the chamber as his mess was cleaned up, delaying a vote on a Beijing-backed bill to criminalize insulting China's national anthem that the opposition was destined to lose. China has defended the removal of opposition lawmakers as the right medicine. In a speech earlier this week, senior Beijing official Zhang Xiaoming said only patriotic people should be allowed to serve as lawmakers.
Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha ordered security agencies to crack down on pro-democracy protesters days after police used tear gas and water cannon at a Bangkok rally. The country has been rocked since July by youth-led protests demanding a new constitution, unprecedented calls to reform the untouchable monarchy, and for Prayut to resign. Clashes outside Parliament on Tuesday between pro-democracy protesters and hardline royalists marked a steep rise in violence, with 6 people shot. A day later, some 20,000 people massed in Bangkok's main shopping district, and protesters daubed anti-royal graffiti outside the Thai National Police headquarters. Now, the premier, Prayut Chan-o-cha, who seized power in a 2014 coup, issued a statement Thursday warning protesters will be hit with the full force of the law. He also said the government and security agencies need to intensify their practices and enforce all sections of all laws. Now, this could mean more charges under the country's harsh royal defamation laws, which are routinely interpreted to include any criticism of any aspect of the monarchy, including content posted or shared on social media. King Maha Vajiralongkorn asked the Thai government in June to suspend using the lese-majeste laws, but human rights critics say there is a host of other legislation that authorities can use to target democracy activists.
Eagle News will be right back. Don't go away.
This portion is brought to you by RJK Services Manpower Agency Corporation.
The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which the Philippines is part of, has signed a new document that will address non-tariff measures in trading coronavirus-related products within the region. In a statement on Thursday, Department of Trade and Industry Secretary Ramon Lopez said economic ministers of ASEAN signed the Memorandum of Understanding on the implementation of non-tariff measures on essential goods at the sidelines of the 19th ASEAN Economic Community Council held last November 10. Under the MOU, ASEAN member states were urged to refrain from introducing or maintaining trade restrictive measures on essential goods. The MOU covers 152 tariff lines of medicines as well as medical supplements or supplies and equipment under the ASEAN list of essential goods.
After keeping key rates steady in the last two rate meetings, Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas Policymaking Monetary Board slashed these by 25 basis points after noting the need to further boost the economy. Effective on Friday, the central bank's overnight reverse repurchase or RRP rate is at 2%. The overnight RP rate is 2.5% and the overnight deposit rate is 1.5%. BSP Governor Benjamin Diokno said the board took note of current developments such as the benign inflation environment, the within target inflation projection, and the uncertainties on account of the pandemic hit global economy. Take a look.
At its meeting on monetary policy today, the Monetary Board decided to cut the interest rate on BSP's overnight reverse repurchase facility by 25 basis points to 2%, effective Friday, 20 November 2020. The interest rates on the overnight deposit and lending facilities were likewise reduced to 1.5% and 2.5% respectively. The balance of risk to the inflation outlook also remains tilted toward the downside, owing largely to potential disruptions to domestic and global economic activity amid the ongoing pandemic. Meanwhile, uncertainty remains elevated amid the resurgence of COVID-19 cases globally. However, the Monetary Board also observed that global economic prospects have moderated in recent weeks. At the same time, the Monetary Board noted that while domestic output contracted at a slower pace in the third quarter of 2020, muted business and household sentiment and the impact of recent natural calamities could pose strong headwinds to the recovery of the economy in the coming months. Given these considerations, the Monetary Board assessed that there remains a critical need for continuing policy support measures to bolster economic activity and boost market confidence. With a benign inflation environment and stable inflation expectations, the Monetary Board sees enough policy space for a reduction in the policy rate at this time to uplift market sentiment and nurture the country's economic recovery amid increased downside risk to growth. Looking ahead, the BSP stands ready to deploy full arsenal of instruments as needed in fulfillment of its mandate to maintain price and financial stability conducive to sustainable economic growth.
President Xi Jinping pegged China as the pivot point for global free trade on Thursday, vowing to keep his huge economy open and warning against protectionism. Buoyed by the signing of the world's largest trade pact over the weekend, Xi said the Asia-Pacific is the forerunner driving global growth in a world hit by multiple challenges, including the pandemic. He vowed openness to trade and refuted any possibility of the decoupling of the world's second largest economy. Watch this.
开放是国家进步的前提，封闭 必然导致落后。当今世界经济全球化潮流不可逆转，任何国家都无法关起门来搞建设。我们绝不会走历史回头路，不会谋求脱钩，或是搞封闭排他的小圈子。凡是愿同中国合作的国家、地区企业，我们都会积极开展合作。疫情终将过去，胜利必将到来。让我们携起手来，风雨同舟，守望相助，坚持开放合作，畅通内外循环，共创共享亚太和世界更加美好的未来。
The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, Forum, held online this year because of the coronavirus pandemic, brings together 21 Pacific Rim countries, including the world's two biggest economies, accounting for about 60% of global GDP. Trump, wounded by his election loss to Joe Biden, did not take part in the summit or even send a high-level delegate in his place. The APEC gathering comes a week after China and 14 other Asia-Pacific countries signed the world's largest free trade deal. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, which excludes the U.S., is viewed as a major coup for China and further evidence that Beijing is setting the agenda for global commerce as Washington retreats. RCEP's rival was the Trans-Pacific Partnership, championed by former President Barack Obama, but Trump pulled out of it, and the pact has been replaced by a watered-down alternative that the United States has not joined. Xi had no direct words for President-elect Biden, whose ascension to office next year, while still clouded by Trump's refusal to concede defeat, is seen as likely to see a more nuanced extension of Washington's current China policy. Biden has been strident on China's human rights record, from the Uyghur Muslims in its Xinjiang region to Hong Kong's democracy movement.
Now, Prime Minister Boris Johnson will on Thursday unveil what is being billed as Britain's biggest program of investment in the armed forces since the end of the Cold War. In a speech to lawmakers in Parliament, Johnson will announce an extra £16.5 billion in funding over the next 4 years. It follows the ruling Conservatives' commitment in their election manifesto last year to increase defense spending by 0.5% above inflation until 2025. Prime Minister Johnson's Downing Street office said the cash boost would cement the UK's position as the largest defense spender in Europe and the second largest in NATO. Downing Street also said increased UK military investments will target cutting-edge technology, including cyber and space capabilities, while also addressing weaknesses in the defense arsenal. Now, this comes despite Britain's economy suffering a historic downturn this year due to the coronavirus crisis, which has seen the government spend unprecedented sums to support people and businesses. The Prime Minister will announce a new agency dedicated to artificial intelligence, the creation of a national cyber force, and a new space command capable of launching its first rocket by 2022.
Prime Minister.
The losses in agriculture and infrastructure due to Typhoon Ulysses, which devastated parts of Luzon here in the Philippines last week, have now hit over 10 billion pesos, the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council said on Thursday. In its update, the NDRRMC said agriculture damage was placed at 4,017,999,590 in regions 1, 2, 3, Calabarzon, Region 5, the Cordillera Administrative Region, and the National Capital Region. The number of affected families is now at 835,599, or 3,512,784 persons in 5,898 barangays in Regions 1, 2, 3, Calabarzon, Mimaropa, Region 5, NCR, and the CAR. Meanwhile, the death toll remained at 73, with the number of injured still at 24 and 19 missing.
And U.S. regulators on Wednesday cleared the Boeing 737 MAX to return to the skies, ending its 20-month grounding after 2 fatal crashes that plunged the company into crisis. In a video that accompanied the announcement, FAA Administrator Steve Dickson said he was 100% comfortable with having his family fly in the jet. Now, Mr. Dickson piloted test flights during the approval process. Take a look.
Today, we took the final steps to enable the Boeing 737 MAX to safely return to commercial service. And this morning, I signed an order rescinding the grounding order that the FAA issued on March 13th, 2019. We were never driven by a timeline, but rather followed a methodical and deliberate safety process, a process that ultimately took 20 months to complete. Now, during this time, FAA employees diligently worked on the fixes that were necessary to address the known safety issues that played a role in the tragic loss of 346 lives aboard Lion Air Flight 610 and Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. Now, based on all the activities that we've undertaken during the past 20 months and my personal experience flying the aircraft, I can tell you now that I am 100% comfortable with my family flying on it. Now, this doesn't mean that the MAX will immediately take to the skies. We will still have to approve the 737 MAX pilot training program for every U.S. airline operating the MAX.
Now, the plane was grounded after 2 crashes that killed a total of 346 people in 2018 and 2019. Both Boeing and the FAA have come under fire in the wake of the crisis, with critics saying Boeing sacrificed safety for profit and that the FAA was too deferential to the private giant. And Eagle News will be right back. Stay tuned.
This portion is brought to you by Kubert, an expert in air conditioning and electromechanical. Also engaged in structural, electrical, fire protection, plumbing, and sanitary services. Kubert, your ultimate MEPS and air conditioning solutions.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Scientists in Singapore have developed a liquid window that can block sunlight while trapping heat to reduce energy consumption from heating and air conditioning. Watch this.
So this is the first smart liquid window. So why we said it's smart? Simply because in the summertime, it's going to block the light automatically. And in winter, it's going to let the light to come in. So in order to warm up in the house for winter and block the sunlight in summer. Because it is liquid inside the window. So this liquid is going to hold the heat inside the window. So it's going to release the heat gradually. So It's nearly 20% of the total energy is get lost through the windows. So that's why we have to drive this technology in a very fast way, because we think it can help to cut down the global warming. We say that it can save about up to 30% compared with the low-E glass and also the double-gaze glass. These two are the most commercially available energy-saving glasses.
Researchers at Nanyang Technological University poured a mixture of microhydrogel water and water and a stabilizer between two glass panels. The hydrogel causes the mixture to turn opaque when it heats up and become transparent again once it cools, allowing it to automatically block sunlight in the summer and let in sunlight in the winter. The water's high heat capacity allows the window to store heat during the day and gradually release it at night. The result is a window that is up to 45% more energy efficient than traditional glass windows and 30% more energy efficient than commercially available energy-saving windows, researchers say. The window also reduces noise 15% more effectively than double-glazed windows. According to the United Nations, buildings, construction, and operations accounted for nearly 40% of energy-related carbon dioxide emissions in 2017.
Lobsteropolis, an exhibition by British pop artist Philip Colbert, can be visited in person or remotely from a computer or a phone via a telepresence robot able to wander around and interact with other visitors. The idea, he says, came about during the lockdown and could represent possible future solutions to keep physical distances if needed. Take a look.
The idea of using robots in the exhibition really came out of sort of the pandemic. When I was stuck at home and I was contemplating how I was going to do an exhibition during a pandemic and how that would be possible, I was sort of thinking, well, rather than doing what the trend was of just going digitally and putting an exhibition online, I sort of was really interested in this idea of almost creating this like fantastical sort of shipwreck idea of doing something very physical that people could access through sort of robots effectively, to actually go to a gallery as a robot and meet a friend as a robot and then experience the show as robots and chat and have conversations somewhere else. It's like another step in of reality, another possibility of reality. So, as an artist, the idea of creating this exhibition around my work and being able to add that in as a part of the phenomenon of experiencing the exhibition seemed like a very interesting way of mixing sort of art and technology and utilizing the opportunity of this time to try and do something different. People actually have really enjoyed this surrealness of it. I think when people have actually logged in and realized they can control the robot and they can look at the art and they actually feel present in this space, because let's say there's a mirrored sculpture in the room next door and they can actually see their own reflection on the screen in the sculpture. So they feel that like they're actually present in the space. The society needs the activity to support all this cultural value that's been created and needs to be sustained. So in a way, it's responsible to come up with solutions to keep things moving and keep things happening. And I think in a way, the robots just represent a possible future solution that could really actually help keep, physical spaces going in times of pandemics.
Interesting. That's our future. Well, that's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I am CJ Hero. Join us again tomorrow.
And at the end of the day, as I always say, there remains so much more to be grateful for. I'm Alma Angeles, and we live in interesting times.
This program is supported by SMC Infrastructure, building a better world.